is one of the great gems of the university campus. And I want to read a bit of an introduction so you really get a sense of who he is and what his interests are. He's a professor of African American, and Caribbean Studies in the Department of Ethnic Studies. He's also the founding and director of the Center for African American Studies here at CU, which we call CAUSE, the CA, because it is also a cause. So it reminds us. He's also a research fellow in the College of Human Sciences at the University of South Africa. Professor Rabaka has published 17 books and more than 100 scholarly articles, book chapters, and essays. His books include Africana Critical Theory Against Epistemic Apartheid, W.E.B. Du Bois, he's a scholar of Du Bois, by the way, W.E.B. Du Bois and the Disciplinary Decadence of Sociology, Forms of Feminism, Frantz Fanon's Critical Theory and the Dialectics of Decolonization, Concepts of Cabralism, Amilcar Cabral in the Africana Critical Theory, Civil Rights Music, the soundtracks of the Civil Rights Movement. Particularly want to point to that last one. He's also, music is one of his major passions. He's also a jazz musician, well known in our campus as a big supporter of someone very much involved with their College of Music. Many awards, distinguished career awards. He's conducted archival research and lectured extensively, both nationally and internationally, and has been the recipient of several community service citations, distinguished teaching awards, research fellowships, and he's a dynamo, which you are about to experience. So I give you my colleague, Professor Reiland Rabaka.
I'm going to turn my mic on because I've had instructions from Spike Lee and Tyler Perry here. My brothers. Can y'all hear me? Do I need this thing? Yeah. I do. You say, oh, okay, thank you. Okay. Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. We good? Is my mic hot?
I don't think
Turn up a little bit. I like my mic to sound nice. I want to begin by saying a heartfelt thank you to my beloved brothers, Stuart and Nabil. It's not very many people that can get me to come out in this weather. I'm a tropical kind of brother, you know what I mean? So it's not very many people that can get me to come out in this kind of weather. But since you did come out, I intend to give you what you came for. This is about us sharing knowledge about something sacred, serious, and we need a little bit more democratic discussion surrounding religiosity, spirituality, various people's traditions of faith and belief. And I hope that as we go through this over the next little bit, you'll see that at the heart of this work is a commitment to a love ethic, right? This is going to be really important for me. So I'll try to keep it together, bear with me. And if you believe in something greater, please, I'm soliciting prayer. Pray for me, because I definitely need it right now. Stuart, you know, we were talking this morning, and one of the reasons you said that you created this center is that you were sort of intellectually isolated, right? You wanted to be able to talk about both communication and also religion. And that a lot of times you spend a lot of time doing a lot of background work. I'm going to start by doing some background work because there's not a lot of people, everybody knows this on this campus, that are doing African American studies or Africana studies, Caribbean studies, so on and so forth. So I want to give you a framework for understanding who Du Bois was and who Du Bois has become, right? Obviously, a lot of y'all, like me, believe that we don't die. I don't believe in death. I only believe in afterlife, right? I believe in rebirth. So Du Bois, actually, some people have said, has more of a life after, right? August 27, 1963, than he did before. That's the day that he transitioned and became an ancestor, right? And so again, ancestors are not dead. They continue to teach us some things. Du Du Bois was born February 23rd, 1868. Du Bois is African American, so that date is going to be very important because that means that Du Bois was born 5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation and 3 years after Juneteenth. So Du Bois is born, as he says in The Souls of Black Folk, in the shadow of bondage. Du Bois was educated at Fisk, Harvard University, and the University of Berlin. I should point out he was born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. So he's born in the Northeast. He studied philosophy, history, politics, and economics. So notice his interdisciplinary training before they had a word for it. His interdisciplinary training before they even had a word for it. And in fact, right, it's important to understand Du Bois got his first BA from Fisk University, which is an HBCU. That's an acronym for a historically Black college or university. He got his BA in classics. He went on to Harvard and got his second BA in philosophy. He went from there to get his master's in history from Harvard. He transferred to the University of Berlin, got a second master's degree in political economy, started working on his PhD at the University of Berlin in political economy, came back to Harvard and picked up his PhD in history. Du Bois, many of us argue, by the time he was 27 years old, had the equivalent of 2 BAs, 2 MAs, and 2 PhDs. So this is one of the most impeccably trained human beings in the world. Notice I didn't say one of the most impeccably trained African-American intellectuals or something like that. You don't have to put Black in front of it. You don't have to put African-American in front of it, right? Du Bois doesn't need any of these kinds of qualifiers, if you will. He's the first African-American to earn his PhD from Harvard University. Very, very important point. Du Bois is unique because he has an 80-year publishing career. He started publishing in 1883, and it goes all the way until he passes away in 1963. He started publishing when he was only 15 years old. Something interesting about Du Bois's life, his mother passed away when he was only 16 years old, so he was still a high schooler. Like myself, he was raised by a single mom, and so that was really his rock, his bedrock, his foundation, his family. And from there, he was actually taken over by a group called the National Association of Colored Women. So this is the first civil rights organization, right, in the history of this nation. It's called the National Association of Colored Women. They took him in, and that's how he got funding to go through and get all these degrees. He considered them surrogate mothers, the National Association of Colored Women. So when Du Bois becomes a man and starts his own organization, he pays tribute to his surrogate mothers. That's why it's called the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He's paying tribute to the very first civil rights organization. So that means that civil rights struggles for African Americans begins on a Black feminist note. Most people don't acknowledge that. I'm talking to anybody that might be interested in womanist theology. Ooh, they can't hear me in here today. Not really. It's so early in the morning. He co-founded the NAACP. He's one of the first scholars to seriously study African Americans' retention of African culture and contributions to American history and culture. And he passed away August 27th, 1963. Now that's going to stand out for anybody that knows anything about African American history and culture, because that's the day before the March on Washington. So this is why at the end of the I Have a Dream speech, Martin Luther King Jr. rolls up his speech and says, like that old man in Africa, I have a dream. Du Bois died in Ghana, West Africa, because they essentially kicked him out of the United States for being too radical. Du Bois considered himself, I'm gonna say it slow because it's early, a radical Democrat. What we need is a radical democracy. Because if what we have been having before is democracy, we obviously need a lot more. I don't know if y'all, maybe my mic ain't on this morning. Is my mic? Ooh, oh, I'm not gonna mess up y'all's good program. That's what you do. Don't, baby, don't. It's okay. Calm down. I'm not gonna mess up your program. Don't worry. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna be polite and nice. Got me up early in the morning. Okay. So here we go. There are two areas that I feel like we should emphasize to really understand Du Bois's religious studies. That's going to be Du Bois's relationship to history. And notice that he works in a lot of different areas of history. Okay, history of race. Obviously, he's considered a pioneer. I actually don't like that word. An inventor, a progenitor, if you will, in terms of the history of race. African history. He wrote several books on African history. American history in general. African American history. Women's history, intellectual history, cultural history, social history, political history, economic history, and religious history. So notice then that all of these sub-disciplines within the realm of history that Du Bois engages, and it's particularly that last one, religious history. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. Then we have Du Bois in sociology. Again, so many different sub-disciplines, sub-fields within sociology that Du Bois is drawing from and helps to contribute to, lay the foundation for historical sociology, political sociology, urban and rural sociology, sociology of culture, sociology of race, sociology of gender, sociology of class, sociology of education, sociology of religion, and sociology of crime. Now notice in these first couple of bullet points here, this means that Du Bois is what I call in my work, embryonic intersectionality. So it's not the intersectionality of Kimberly Crenshaw, 1989. That's not what I'm arguing. Again, some of y'all know, I know Kim, that's the homie, that's my mentor. So I'm not saying that, again, Du Bois no. I'm saying it's embryonic. It's in a formative stage. It's a proto kind of intersectionality that African Americans and other people have been doing in this country for a while. That there's a tendency, as Fanon says in Black Skin, White Mask, for people to overdetermine Black folk by race. They overdetermine Latinx folks based on their race. They overdetermine Asian folk, right, by their race. They overdetermine Indigenous and Native American people. And for me, race is simply one of many aspects of my identity. Can you hear me? Are you with me? I'm gonna wake you up. I feel like an alarm clock. I came to wake you up. What's up, Boulder? I'm back. You know, oh boy. Du Bois and religion. We're gonna spend a little bit of time on this right here. Arguably the first sociologist of American and African American religion. Please notice that when Du Bois got his PhD, there was no such thing as sociology. You could not get a PhD in sociology. That's how early we're talking. Now what we're doing, if you're taking notes, African American intellectual history. Please write it down. They don't teach that very much on this campus. Am I right or wrong, professors? African American intellectual culture. They don't understand this. Right? And there's a tendency to always make non-white intellectuals derivative of some white founding father. If we're going to talk about democracy, you know, that derivation, and they do it to women, they do it to queer and trans folk, we're always derivative of some great white founding father. And even as I say that, I can acknowledge how influenced I've been by. I can name off a lot of people, but I'm gonna just save y'all this morning. So Du Bois is actually looking critically, social scientifically, and empirically at religion in America. One of the first scholars to do. Rescue me if I'm wrong. We're gonna have some Q&A. Rescue me if I'm wrong, right? Certainly one of the first to social scientifically engage African American religion. And then underneath here, these are some of the works that he contributes in terms of the study, the critical study of religion in America. If you read this book that he wrote in Philadelphia, he looks at the religious practices and culture of African Americans in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's called the Philadelphia Negro. We all know that there's this deep and profound religious subtext to the souls of Black folk. Then this very first work in terms of African American religious studies, the Negro Church, 1903. Then he does the Negro in the South, John Brown, obviously John Brown, his abolitionism, his anti-racist abolitionism was profoundly influenced by his belief, his faith. And I want to point out, Du Bois wrote the first biography of John Brown. If some of you don't know, John Brown was a white abolitionist. He was anti-racist. And so this is where you can see Du Bois' founding of the NAACP. The very same year he published John Brown, right? The NAACP is founded February the 12th, 1909. He publishes John Brown in 1909, and Du Bois founds the NAACP with progressive whites, particularly many of our beautiful Jewish brethren and sisters. Right? This is powerful because he's already showing you a kind of interracialism, a kind of interfaith, something that Howard Thurman would pick up on. And then, of course, Howard Thurman would influence Martin Luther King Jr., something that Polly Murray would pick up on. And just go on to, I won't bring up Ruth. And so, I mean, the influence, the African American influence sometimes is erased or co-opted. Talk about colonization. Colonization operates at lots of different levels. And then this book called The Morals and Manners of Among African Americans. They were saying American Negroes back then. Here's some more of his contributions to religion, the gift of Black folk. One of the gifts, Du Bois argues, is African Americans' religiosity, African American spirituality, a profound gift to the United States of America that often goes unacknowledged. But tomorrow and on Monday, everybody's going to be running around listening to I Have a Dream without understanding the culture, the religious culture, the church tradition that speech grows out of. What they're doing is decontextualizing. See, what I'm trying to do is provide you with some of the context so that you can understand, wow, this is a long tradition. Y'all remember how Barack Obama got in trouble initially when he was campaigning because of Jeremiah Wright and Black liberation theology? There's a whole tradition. Even when you hear Obama's oratory, right? There's a whole tradition there, but most people, they don't know Black folk. They think they know us because what they know is Black popular culture, and they know some Black athletes. And everybody knows I got the head coach on speed dial. We'll be hanging out tomorrow. So nobody's saying anything against African American athletes. That's not what I'm saying. It doesn't need to be either or. It can be both and. That's Africana religious studies, right? It doesn't need to be linear. It can be curvilinear. Are y'all with me? Now, I'm just going to talk to you just directly, if that's okay. All right. The rest of y'all can put your fingers in your ears if you want to. One of my favorite books by W.E.B. Du Bois is called Prayers for Dark People. Have you got a chance to read this yet? This brother, when he was at Wilberforce in Ohio, which is a HBCU, but it's a religious school, they would make everybody go to prayer. Du Bois said, well, I don't believe what y'all believe. See, y'all, it's not a radical religion that y'all believe in. Y'all going along with somebody else. That's not what I believe. Okay? He wrote out his own prayers. I've wept reading them. If you want to read something by Du Bois, go get Prayers for Dark People. It was published posthumously. This is out of his papers at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Some of you all know that I helped him digitize those papers between 2003 and 2013, and now they're available online, right? So you can go and do the work. And they have a whole Du Bois Center at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. I have many beautiful colleagues there whom I greatly respect, admire. I've learned a great deal from them. But Prayers for Dark People, it's not even in print anymore. Maybe it still is, but it's an incredible book. He wrote, pray, can you imagine? This is wow. So the people that say, oh, Du Bois was this or that or the other, they don't understand his relationship to religion. And Du Bois actually didn't do religion as much as he did spirituality, right? And we can have a conversation about that. Du Bois contributed not simply to sociology of religion, but also to history of religion, philosophy of religion, anthropology of religion, psychology of religion, religious economy, and political theology, among others. He prefigured Black Christian nationalism, Black liberation theology, and some elements of womanist theology, which he learned from the church women who founded the National Association of Colored Women. Right? So just notice then, it's important for me as an African American meant to acknowledge the Black feminist influence on my life, right? And I'm talking beyond my mom and my grandmamas and them, right? I'm talking about the intellectual. I'm talking about Katie Cannon at Temple University, who schooled me. You see what I'm saying? That's profound if you think about it, right? To acknowledge it though, and I believe, especially sometimes in the realm of religion, there's a tendency for patriarchy to run rampant. I said it. I said it. I got the chief of police on speed dial too. I mean, just in case, right? She gonna be there, she gonna be tomorrow. I'm just saying, though, I gotta have friends in high and low places. Sometimes I feel like Jesus. Okay. I want to go right into the formal part of this. I want to start out with this little piece right here. Can I get a witness? There were cold, dark days in the past, crammed in the cracks and crevices of slave ships named Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. There were long days working in the searing heat of the southern sun. We sweated and worked and worked and worked, while others looked on in amusement and made fun. We worked behind mules. We worked pulling plows. We worked saddling up horses. We worked shoeing ornery cows. And our ancestors withered and wept when they thought about home and all that was to come and all that was lost are long gone. Can I get a witness? Somebody save our souls, but please don't promise us no more of that pie in the sky after we die. We have long died many unusual deaths in this land of milk and honey. Indeed, we have died strange deaths in this land of purported opportunity and blood-soaked money. I'm not an academic. I'm an intellectual. An intellectual will use anything, anywhere, anytime to get the point across. I believe that there are things that I can express in poetry that I can't in my prose, right? And as a jazz musician, being trained all those years in the arts, the expressive culture, that's fundamental to Black religiosity. The ability to express yourself, to live out loud, you see. To not allow people to mute you. Can y'all hear that womanist theology influence? To not allow the society, even if it's sexist from top to bottom, not allowing them to mute you. We about to have some fun in here today. I don't know if I'm gonna have to be able to read it. I ain't gonna go through all. I'm just gonna have some fun with it. We got a little bit of time. Here we go. As a historian of religion with strong sociological leanings, Du Bois chronicled, please understand this part right here, the radical thought and rebellious lives of early African-American religious leaders. Harriet Tubman, deeply and profoundly spiritual, had visions, said that God was talking to her. Now, of course, today people would probably put her on some medication. Just think about it. I'm telling the truth. Something is wrong with our society, right? Especially Nabil, a woman that gets visions. In this country, deeply and profoundly spiritual women, they burned them at the stake. It's called the Salem witch trial. God bless you. Just think about that. This association. See, what if sometimes sisters' spirituality may express itself, may come out differently? Can the churches accommodate that? Can the synagogues accommodate that? Can the mosques accommodate that? Can the spiritual centers? See, I don't have to worry about it. Nobody can excommunicate me. You can't kick me out of nothing. I'm like Du Bois, I'm an independent. I was just before Bernie Sanders and AUOC, I'm an independent. Yeah. Number two, intra, that means within, intra-African-American class divisions and how secular distinctions such as these played themselves out in the realm of religion. Some people don't realize, Du Bois pointed out in the Philadelphia Negro that they're all different classes. African-Americans have class formation. Some people think that, that you're talking Marxism if you start talking about classes and different groups, socioeconomic statuses of people. And it's very important for us to be able to acknowledge there was a small African-American sort of middle class, which we call pejoratively sometimes, the black bourgeoisie. Right? Now, again, that's only like 10%. The 90% are the masses. And look at how that replicates life on the plantation. The people that worked in the house, that was just a few, that was just a handful. The majority worked out in the fields every day. I just read you a little poem about that, right? That's what we need to understand. It's the masses of the people. That's where the religious fervor is. That's where the vibrancy in terms of our culture is coming from. And what if I could also point out to you, the masses is the same group who are also at the heart of our arts. That's producing many of our greatest artists, the underclasses, the working class. I ain't gonna bring up hip hop. Some of y'all know that that's one of my things. And it's also this class that's producing some of our most iconic athletes, politicians, lawyers. Just think about it. So if you just focus on the elites, a lot of times they're too busy trying to be like, you're bringing. Oh, it's, oh boy. Number 3, the dual sacred and secular nature of African American religion and the Black church. So notice, it's not, God bless you, the African American church isn't simply, it doesn't simply serve sacred purposes. It serves secular purposes, especially for a group during segregation, like African Americans. Just think about it. This is one of the only communal spaces where Black folk could get together and actually not have somebody eavesdropping. We're gonna run tell massa what we saying, what we doing, and everything. It's one of the Du Bois is one of the first African American institutions, the church. So maybe many of us don't believe, well, you know, what the preacher's preaching every Sunday. Some of y'all probably realize I was the youth minister of music. That's the only reason they got me to stay up in there. I mean, don't tell my mom I said that. But that's the sacred Black sacred song. That's my relationality to it, right? And Nabil already knows this. I actually now listen to sacred songs from various traditions from all over the world. I love sacred music. I love it. It's something about that. There's just something about it. It just moves me very, very deeply. I'm not going to say more than the preacher preaching and more than the, I'm not going to say that, but I'm just saying though, right, that upbringing as a youth minister of music and the fact that there's something about the church where they believe that everybody is gifted and talented. So I'm saying everybody under the sound, in my cosmology and my worldview, I believe that everybody in this room has a gift or a talent, and it's really up to us to cultivate that, to nurture that, to bring that out. And that's why we have a special obligation as professors to draw that out, right? And so that they can contribute that to the wider world. That's what this is about. It's not just about money. I'm glad there's no administrators in here. It's not just about making money. You see, it shouldn't be about that, right? There's a sacred calling to what it is that we're doing. Or at least there should be. Number 4, the conflicts within white Christian denominations over the issue of whether enslaved Africans could or should be baptized. Now, the fact that they're debating it, I think that's an indictment. The fact that any church is involved in enslaving people, I have some problems with that. Du Bois had some problems with that. And number 5, why the white Baptists and Methodists were more successful in sowing the seeds of Christianity in the hearts and minds of the enslaved. Du Bois, along with these issues, among others, Du Bois strongly stressed that African American religion, particularly as embodied in and flowing out of the Black church, was not only, quote, the first distinctively Black American social institution, but, and most importantly, the sole surviving institution of the African fatherland, by which he meant Africa. We call it the motherland now, but you can see patriarch, they was calling it the fatherland. Somebody's going to help me. Religion, he wrote, in the Negro church in 1903, was the lone social sphere in which enslaved Africans had any agency, and even in this realm, they were severely regulated. Du Bois, writing with the sense of unmitigated awe and critical discovery, declared, at first sight, it would seem that slavery completely destroyed every vestige of spontaneous social movement among Black folk. The home had deteriorated. Political authority and economic initiative was in the hands of the masters. Property as a social institution did not exist on plantations. And indeed, it is usually assumed by historians and sociologists that every vestige of internal development disappeared, leaving the slaves no means of expression for their common life, thought, and striving. This is not strictly true. Look at Du Bois, how direct he is. He said, no, now wait now. This is not strictly true. The vast power of the priest and the African state has already been noted. His realm alone, the province of religion and medicine, remained largely unaffected by the plantation system in many important particulars. The Black priest, therefore, early became an important figure on the plantation and found this function as the interpreter of the supernatural, the comforter of the sorrowing, and as the one who expressed rudely but picturesquely the longing and disappointment and resentment of a stolen people. From such beginnings arose and spread this with marvelous rapidity the Negro Church, the first distinctively Black American social institution. It was not at first by any means a Christian church. Please notice what he just said. They enslaved people that embrace indigenous religions in Africa. They enslaved folks that were Muslim coming out of Africa. So the religious diversity in terms of Africa is often erased. Okay. It was not at first by any means a Christian church, but a mere adaptation of those African rites, which we roughly designate by the term Obe worship or voodooism. Association and missionary efforts soon gave these rites a veneer of Christianity, and gradually, after 2 centuries, the church became Christian with a simple Calvinistic creed, but with many of the old customs still clinging to the services. That's why some of y'all know on Sunday mornings, what's happening in the Black church could be very different than what's happening in the white church. You're talking to a youth minister of music. They called us a church record when our gospel man got up there. It's okay. It is this historic fact. It is this historic fact that the Black church of today bases itself upon the sole surviving social institution of the African fatherland that accounts for its extraordinary growth and vitality. This institution therefore naturally assumed many functions which the other harshly suppressed social organs had to surrender. The church became the center of amusement, of what little spontaneous economic activity remained, of education, and of all social intercourse. This is profound, you all, because Du Bois is talking about the multifunctionality of the Black church, that it serves multiple purposes, right? So whatever your relationship is with your church, it could be very different for different people, right? And their different spiritual centers. African-American religion was forged in the fires of abolitionist struggle, and the quest for freedom was not quenched by the bellowing but weak-willed words of the Emancipation Proclamation. Therefore, Du Bois studied the impact of African-American religion, basically the Black church, on African-American social development and cultural survival after the period of enslavement. African-American religious thought and practices, Du Bois had a hunch, changed during the decades after enslavement because although there was de jure freedom, Blacks were still in a white-dominated, hyper-racially ruled social world and did not have de facto freedom. Hence, American apartheid lingered on, leaving its stench and stain on everyone and everything it came into contact with, even religion. What we're talking about right now is the racial colonization of religion. that it wasn't just bodies and lands and labor that was colonized. What about cultural colonization? The way that they colonize culture. I could push even further and say even our conceptions of gender have been colonized. Don't make me bring up sexuality, you know, it's about to be Saturday night. You know how, you know, Black folk do. Sunday morning, it's all sacred and everything, but I'm talking Saturday night. And I'm also talking about the duality between spirituality and sexuality in the African American world. I mean, Aretha Franklin was a church record, but Aretha Franklin was also soul sister #1. Everybody knows James Brown started out in the gospel group. That's how he got out of prison. He went to the warden and they sang a song. He brought the prisoners in there. They sang to the parole board, not this, and they let him go. They let him go. They let him go. He sang his way out of prison, the gospel song. And as soon as he got out, that same, they was called the Gospel Flames. He checked the day he got out, they changed their name to the Famous Flames. And it's all, I mean, we all know it's all American music history. Lord have mercy. It's a duality. Oh, y'all better get me. Okay. In the Philadelphia Negro, Du Bois analyzed a wide range of African American religious practices that illustrated the dramatic, sacred, and secular changes in Black church life in the 3.5 decades since the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Beginning with the history of the Black church, Du Bois then turned his attention to its organizational structures and social functions, and was undoubtedly the first to systematically study and document its political positions, educational initiatives, entertainment activities, missionary efforts, charitable organizations, insurance societies, and homes for the aged and infirm. He examined congregational economic life, what Robert Worthen has recently referred to as religious economy, from debts and membership contributions to the value of church properties and pastors' salaries. Further, Du Bois critically observed how African American class divisions within the churches and various denominations played themselves out, causing continuous stratification and discontinuous congregational affiliation. He painstakingly detailed an intricate interrelation of church and/or religion-related social and political programs and the lingering leitmotif of African retentions, which I have come to think is one of the hallmarks of his work, is ubiquitous. In words that read more like a sorrow-filled sinner, testifying in a Black church at a Sunday morning service, Du Bois wrote in the Philadelphia Negro, and I quote Du Bois, "We often forget that the rise of a church organization amongst Black folk was a curious phenomenon. The church really represented all that was left of African tribal life and was the sole expression of the organized efforts of the enslaved. It was natural that any movement among freedmen and freed women should center around their religious life, the sole remaining element of their formal tribal system. The Black church is the peculiar and characteristic product of the transplanted African and deserves a special study. As a social group, the Black church may be said to have antedated the Black family on American soil. As such, it has preserved, on the one hand, many functions of tribal organization, and on the other hand, many of the family functions. Its tribal functions are shown in its religious activity, its social authority, and general guiding and coordinating work. Its family functions are shown by the fact that the church is the center of social life and intercourse, acts as a newspaper and intelligence bureau, is the center of amusements, indeed, is the world in which Black folk move and act. So far reaching are these functions of the church that its organization is almost political." That's Du Bois in 1899, talking about the multifunctionality of the African American church. This is profound. So Du Bois quit, here I go. Du Bois accentuated both the social and political functions of the Black church. In his estimate, it is the most remarkable product of Black American civilization because, quote, it is a democratic church, a church where the governing power is largely in the hands of the mass of the membership, unquote. The democratic nature of the Black church is a recurring theme in Du Bois's writings on religion, especially when he compared it with the white church. Because he said, this is Du Bois, the Negro church is at least democratic. It welcomes everybody. It draws no color line, unquote. This is the, he swing like Muhammad Ali, and this is well, he boxing heads and everything. He asserted that the Black church is further distinguished because it serves as a multi-purpose site for moral instruction, political education, social development, and racial/cultural awareness. I want to move on here a little bit with some of these slides. All right, so Du Bois also says of the Black church, it is based as much, so this part we really need to get. It is based as much on African religious thought and practices as it is on European and European American Christian theology. It's going to be really important to acknowledge this because there's a tendency to think of African American religion as being purely something that was handed to them by so-called slave masters during the period of enslavement. And when people do that, they rob African Americans of their own cultural agency. It's almost as if they forgot that Jesus Christ was in Africa, particularly North Africa. I'm just saying. It is as though, I feel so good. It is as though they don't know about Osiris, Isis, Horus. You know, the ancient Egyptian trinity that predates ancient, Egypt is in Africa, right? Osiris, the father. Isis, the mother. Horus, the child. But when it goes to Europe, what happens to the mother because of patriarchy? I'm just asking a question. Don't get mad at me. I'm just asking questions, though, since you're so religious. Can we have some civil discourse? CMCI? Can we communicate? Can I get some information from you? Du Bois on religion. This is me. This is not Du Bois. So when it's Du Bois, I actually put Du Bois in quotes. Now, Bill, with your permission, I'm going to move away from reading. I'm gonna go ahead on so we can have some conversation in just a minute. Okay, we're gonna have some fun. I'm not gonna mess up, Stu. I ain't gonna mess up your good program. Okay. One of the many things that distinguishes Du Bois's critique of religion is that it exposes both the positives and negatives of religion. That means, Nabil, I'm acknowledging that we might have to understand that there could be some negatives based on people's interpretation. I'm not saying anything's wrong with your sacred text. I said, in the realm of interpretation, that's what a religious studies scholar is supposed to do. It's the interpretation. Don't blame the sacred text. It's how some of these people are misinterpreting. They're using and abusing it. I may not be able to get out of here, man. In other words, his critique of religion is deeply dialectical, as with the best of his work. Du Bois undoubtedly saw a certain value in and had a deep and sincere respect for religion. But by the same token, he was also one of its harshest critics, especially when religion was used to uphold racism, sexism, classism, and militarism. Seems like a perversion of religion. If we're gonna go back to the essence, to the core, right? This is tricky. I hope we can have this conversation, Boulder. This is some tricky stuff now. And then because we're not having it at your fallacious religious institution, see, we should be able to have some free discourse in a democratic society. I know Obama's not in office anymore, but okay, we're supposed to have a democratic society where we can have free civil discourse. One of Du Bois's students, a Jewish brother by the name of Herbert Aptheker, who also became Du Bois's literary executive, pardon me. He said this about Du Bois' dislike of denominational religion. This is Herbert Aptheker. The fact is that Du Bois disliked denominational religion and detested that Christianity which became an excuse for the status quo. Hold on, wait. Oh, here, I'm gonna read the whole quote and then I'll pick it up there. Neither in his youth nor in later life did Du Bois attend any church with regularity, but he was well aware of the enormous influence of the church upon the history and lives of Black people and upon his own life. The fact is that Du Bois disliked denominational religion and detested that Christianity which became an excuse for the status quo, whether slavery or racism or war. The religion, as he once put it, of J.P. Morgan rather than of Jesus Christ. A reason for this sharp feeling was Du Bois's admiration for what he took to be the revolutionary, or at the least radical and challenging character of the actual teachings of Jesus. He viewed the Black church as, at its best, the bedrock of his people, their shield and sword, their solace and goal, an indispensable source of their persistence and historical confidence despite all oppression. So notice, much like myself, Du Bois is not really into mass religion, organized religion, right? Because he feels like there's maybe some level of moral decay that's happening in some of these very institutions that should be providing people with open moral discussion and instruction in everything. And so again, I believe some of this is still very relevant to what it is that we're talking about today. Du Bois problematized more than he praised religion. One, he recognized the potential and actual or historical pitfalls of religion. He criticized Black and white religious leaders and institutions alike. He argued that religious hypocrisy is not the exclusive domain of a single racial group, gender, or social class. Now we go to Du Bois's critique of Black clergy and Black congregations. He says Black folk are not satisfied with their ministers. That might shock a lot of people. There's a lot, I mean, for me, not simply one of the things I like about the African American church when I was there, grew up in, was not simply the music, but there was this kind of critical culture. There was some free discussion amongst the deacons and deaconesses, right, in the church. So this whole notion of the intellectual culture is sometimes people don't, I mean, it's almost as if Martin Luther King Jr. just fell out the sky. As if he's not the Reverend Doctor. As if the reason African Americans are so big on calling him Junior is because everybody knows Daddy King was the first Reverend Martin Luther King. There's a whole tradition, there's a whole culture. They act like they've never heard of Vernon Johns. They've never heard of, like, there's a whole tradition, if you will, that these folks grow out of. Here's another thing Du Bois wrote: Black preachers are often condemned for poor leadership and empty sermons, and it is said that men with so much power and influence could make striking moral reforms. This is but partially true. The congregation does not follow the moral precepts of the preacher. Look at how he's critiquing not simply the preachers, but the congregation. This is going to be really interesting because I don't know if some people realize this incredible critical culture that often goes on in terms of the African American church. But Du Bois really also had some serious criticisms of the white church. One, he says the Black church and the white church had different kinds of problems. Actually, this is me. Perhaps not in every instance, but enough to have comparably different critiques. So notice there's two different kinds of critiques that are going on here, right? One set for the Black church, another set for the white church. His major criticism of the white church revolved around its claim of agape, selfless love, or rather what has come to be called Christian love. So for me, here's a series of questions that I'm in the framework of Du Bois's religious thought. How is it possible that white clergy and white laity could avow the cardinal creed of Christian love, agape, and then systematically sanction and perpetually participate in the violation, oppression, and exploitation of their enslaved and or racially segregated Black Christian brethren and sisters? Du Bois took issue with this, serious issue. Here's one of his quotes from 1917 in the Negro Church. I'm getting close to the end. This is Du Bois. It is painfully true. Oh, and when I do this, I thought it was important to have primary sources. That way you can see I'm not just making this stuff up, right? So you don't confuse the message with the messenger. You know how some people get mad. You know? Woo, you get mad at Du Bois. Please don't get mad at me. I got enough people in Boulder mad at me right now. It is painfully true that white Christianity has, in the 20th century, been curiously discredited. Here in the 20th century of the Prince of Peace, the leading nations representing his religion have been murdering, maiming, and hurting each other on a scale unprecedented in the history of humankind. Into the white church of Christ, race prejudice has crept to such an extent it is openly recognized. And in the United States, at least, it is considered the natural and normal thing that white and Black people should belong mostly to different organizations and almost entirely to different congregations. These facts do not impugn Christianity, but they do not make terrible, but they do make terrible comment on the failure of its white followers. Notice he doesn't condemn Christianity outright. He's saying there's a particular way some people have interpreted it, right? Some people have abused it. Some people are using it for ill-gotten gains. Again, you can see at the bottom, that's from his famous essay, The Negro Church, 1917. Here's another primary source. He says, this is from The Church and the Color Line, 1929. Notice this is during the period of the Harlem Renaissance. So Marcus Garvey is also in Du Bois's, right? Talk about Black Christian nationalism. So you had all these, during the Harlem Renaissance period, you have all these sort of Black mega churches all around the country that most people, they actually don't know. But they know a little bit about the UNIA and Garvey, but they had centers like that all around. In fact, they should ride down to a place called Denver, Colorado. They should go into AME Shorter, AME standing for African Methodist Episcopal. They should go to Shorter in Denver. Du Bois himself lectured there in 1927. He tore up Denver, right? Did y'all know Garvey actually came to Denver, 5 Points, and they had to stay at 5 Points in the bill because they wouldn't let African Americans stay anywhere else in Denver, right? I ain't gonna bring up Boulder. We screening. This is not who we are in the law school. Right, if you haven't seen the documentary, February the 8th, we'll be here. We talk about the African American experience in Boulder. We talk about segregation in Boulder. We talk about the Ku Klux Klan in Boulder. Talk about Black Christian nationalism. Ku Klux Klan, that's white Christian terrorism. I may not make it out of here. We might want to call for the stretching. It's gonna be about in here tonight. Yeah, here we go. When the church meets the problem of Black folk, what they used to call the Negro problem, it writes itself down as a deliberate and systematic liar. It does not say, "Come unto me, all ye that labor." It does not love its neighbor as itself. It does not welcome Jew and Gentile, barbarian, Scythian, bond and free. And yet it openly and blatantly professes all of this. The church has opposed every great social reform. It opposed the spread of democracy, universal education, trade unionism, the abolition of poverty, the emancipation of women, the spread of science, the freedom of art and literature, and the emancipation of the Black slave. When the reform was gained, the church righted itself, led usually by some schismatic and heretical part of itself, came over on the Lord's side, and usually did not hesitate both to claim a preponderant share of the glory of victory, and again to emphasize its supernatural claims. Du Bois. Rough, tight but right, ain't it? This is really something. When you look at it, from a different perspective, you can see some different things. Now we're also seeing where this whole notion of African American studies comes in. So when you have a different cosmology, when you have a different axiology, that's just a big Greek word for value system, you interpret things. I'm opening up some other interpretive angles for you. Right? Du Bois opened up some other ways to interpret things. And he's saying instead of leading, that means that he wants to ascribe a leadership role to the church. But he's saying that there's been a failure of leadership often when it comes to social issues. Now, Bill, I also think that's why right now, all across the United States of America, people are celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day. He is somebody that combined the social gospel with the social movement called the civil rights movement. That's leadership. And I ain't saying we got to agree with everything he said and did. And I'm certainly not saying he was perfect. Because ain't nobody perfect. But the reality of the matter is, though, we're talking about one of the greatest exponents of what was called the social gospel. Look at what they did in the middle of the 20th century. And you didn't ask, but I'll tell you, MLK Day for us is really Civil Rights Movement Day. It's not about one person. It's like they never heard of Rosa Parks. It's like they never heard of Ella Baker or Fannie Lou Hamer or Septima Clark. It's not about one person. One man don't make a movement. It's a collect. It's coming together. And do you know who some of the harshest critics of Martin Luther King Jr. was? The African American church. I'm just telling the truth. Y'all mad now. He left this world a very disillusioned, a very depressed. Go read his autobiography. He's some of the harshest. Wait, if you really want to read something, read 1963 letter from a Birmingham City jail. The main people criticizing him. It's like here in Boulder, but I mean some of the main people. They'll go in on each other instead of coming together. What can we get together on? Stu, that's the only reason I'm here with you. CMCI, I'm trying to build a bridge from my little center to your center, big center, because you've been around long. I'm following your footsteps, Mr. Founding Director. I'm giving you your flowers before you go out of town. Doctor Hoover, couldn't make your dinner last night. They canceled my flight. I'm sorry, man. But I showed up today. And if there was a toast last night, I'm giving you your toast right now to you. Run tell your pretty wife I said something. Run tell her, my sister. Go ahead and tell her. And tell her I commend her in the work she's doing with the NAACP. Tell her I said keep on keeping on. And tell her if you want to get her something for Kwanzaa from me, get her John Brown by Du Bois, 1909. David Routledge said Du Bois is the architect of what's called critical white studies. He said they was already doing white studies, but when Du Bois got involved in it, that's what makes it critical, a level of self-reflexivity about your whiteness. Can you hear me? Is my microphone on? I don't know. Huh? Maybe I need to hit him with some of that hip hop. I know. I'm an SP soldier, microphone holder. I'm repping my state from Bolivia to Boulder. I'm gonna finish up the lecture so we can talk. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is my last one for Du Bois. I try to respectfully deliver his work, you see. Because I feel like a lot of people, it's kind of like Martin Luther King, a lot of people talk about it. But really what they're talking about is, I have a dream. They don't know very much beyond that. I'm just being honest with you. And I think that's the value of this new center over here called the Center for African American Studies. I think that's the value of African American Studies. I think that's the value of African American Religious Studies. You see, that's why I'm here. I'm trying to build a bridge. I am not being divisive. I'm here. I showed up in the snowstorm. And you know black people don't like no cold weather. I came out in the snowstorm below. You can tell, run tell if I don't make it home. You tell him he showed up. He kept his word. He kept his word. Oh, boy. Oh. This is Du Bois, and I close out. Perhaps many of us would rather forget it. African American enslavement is what he's talking about. Yet we cannot forget that under the aegis and protection of the religion of the Prince of Peace, of a religion which was meant for the lowly and unfortunate, there arose in America one of the most stupendous institutions of human slavery that the world has seen. The Christian church sponsored and defended this institution, despite occasional protests and effort at amelioration here and there. The Catholic Church approved of and defended slavery. The Episcopal Church defended and protected slavery. The Puritans and Congregationalists recognized and upheld slavery. The Methodists and Baptists stood staunchly behind it. The Quakers gave their consent to it. Indeed, there was not a single branch of the Christian church that did not in the end become part of an impregnable bulwark, defending the trade in human beings and the upholding of them as chattel. W.E.B. Du Bois, will the church remove the color line? And so we close out with one of the things that we can get from Du Bois's work, the racialization of religion. He helps us to underscore that religion is not neutral. Some people think that it is, but it's not. We also learned that about the American medical industry. If you want to read something, go and read a book by Harriet Washington called Medical Apartheid. Subtitle, well, I can't remember because it's a long subtitle. Anyway, she's talking about the medical experimentation on African Americans, particularly during the period of enslavement and all the way through. This is profound, medical apartheid. So some of these institutions, people think of them as neutral, and they're really not. They're really not. The racialization of religion. Principally, he said that principally, that religion is inextricable from the history and culture and political economy of society, and always intersects with and informs the general thought and practices of society. And then here's Du Bois's quote: the American Church of Christ is Jim Crowed from top to bottom. No other institution in America is built so thoroughly or more absolutely on the color line, and everybody knows this. They might not know it. They may know it, but they don't say it. Du Bois is bold enough. This is what you call intellectual audacity. This is what makes him an intellectual and not an academic. An academic plays it safe. Most of them are bourgeois riding around in their BMWs talking about, Stuart, I went into the faculty lounge and they were talking about $700 drivers. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know if they were going to re-enslave me. They were talking about golf clubs. They were talking about golf clubs. I didn't know what they were talking about. What class of BMW? Man, I'm from the projects, man. Nobody in my family ever went to a college or a university. I never went back to the faculty lounge. Haven't been back there since 2005. I just don't feel comfortable in there. I go in my office, I put on my Mahalia Jackson, and I got Sister Rosetta Tharpe with me. James Cleveland and them. It's all right. That's okay. That's okay. How I got over. How I got over. Last point. Religion may be conceived of as being meticulously marked by particular social historical events, social thought, social practices, social organization, and social institutions. If we get nothing else from this, we can see that Du Bois should probably be incorporated much more in critical religious studies. Notice I'm putting the word critical. I know they overuse it at the University of Colorado Boulder. But when I say critical, it's taking a hard look at ourselves, our religiosity, our spiritual traditions, our belief systems. And a lot of these people, a lot of these folks that people raise up as prophets, that's actually what they did. They're quite critical. And I like the fact that Du Bois turns our attention to the revolutionary implications of our religiosity, the radical. And it's about bringing people together rather than tearing people apart. And so I close by emphasizing that from Du Bois, there's a direct line to somebody named Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman, my spiritual mentor. You already know this, brother. Howard Thurman founded the very first interfaith and interracial church in the United States of America. And the same Howard Thurman was the mentor to Martin Luther King. We wouldn't be having no King Day. You probably wouldn't know anything about him if it wasn't for Howard Thurman. And so you see those beautiful pictures of King locked arm in arm. He's got a Buddhist monk on one side. He's got an imam on one side. He's got a Jewish rabbi on one side and a Catholic priest with him. He's got them all. You see, that's the America that I'm committed to, that I believe Du Bois was committed to. And if we criticize, we do so because we love it, not because we hate it. My words are laced with love. I hope that you will accept them in the spirit in which I've given them to you. Thank you.
We do have papers and panelists who are waiting to present, but we have some minutes. So we can allow 10 minutes or so for some interactions, and we can keep conversation going because of the digital age. So you can start with Nancy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Rabaka. That was amazing. I want to thank you for connecting the dots for me between Du Bois and Howard Thurman. I just read Jesus and the Disciplinary for the first time.
One of my favorites.
Willie James Jennings is a mentor of mine. He's the one who connected that for me. So lots of dots. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about, like, I'm a sociologist and I'm most familiar in my circles with the idea of double consciousness.
Yes. Yes.
But considering this, especially this last quote here, I wanted to ask you about Gay Gibson Sema's concept of performances of self-possession.
Right.
And how, particularly in Black popular culture, you know, references to the Black church, references to Christianity, references to faith, references to Jesus are made, and they make white intellectuals really uncomfortable oftentimes.
Right.
But in trying to see it as performances of self-possession, instead, I wanted to ask you about that and ask you what your thoughts were.
You know, do you remember, number one, thank you for the question. I really do appreciate it. I actually learn a lot when people ask questions, especially if they're heartfelt. And so I really appreciate it. Do you remember earlier in the lecture when I talked about this duality between spirituality and sexuality, the sacred and the secular? In some Western cultures, so notice I'm not going to make a gross generalization. You know, I got a lot of family and friends and folks I really admire all throughout Europe. Dichotomies and binaries are problematic. The West got the memo finally, but I think that for us, that they would say sometimes the more religious folks would have a higher sexual appetites, or that it comes out like this energy, right? Just like with the rock stars, like they're creating, and so after they're gonna do the sex, drugs, rock and roll, all this kind of stuff, right? And so we live in a world where those lines are not as hard and fast when you come to the African American context, when you come to continental African context, right? There might be other lines that are hard and fast, right? But the blurring, if you will, of those boundaries, the crossing of certain kinds of borders, and the fact that, are you familiar with the concept of prophetism? So prophetism, the whole notion that many of us are part of faith communities where instead of a central prophet, part of what we do is we become prophetic. This is where most people don't understand somebody like a Cornel West with prophetic pragmatism and prophetism. Like we come out of spaces to where we really want to go and we believe, right? If you really get in the zone, the creator can speak to you and through you. You ever heard an album called A Love Supreme by John Coltrane in 1964, recorded on December the 9th, 1964? He literally, both of his grandfathers, preachers. One of his grandmothers was the choir director, right? So a minister of music. Just think about that. So he felt the highest love, he said, is the love of God. He wanted to play his horn as though it were the voice of God coming through the bell of his horn. Come on. People thought he was Miles Davis. Man, what's wrong with you, man? Right? It's a very interesting thing if you start blurring, like when those lines become blurred, which is why, for me, womanist theology makes so much sense. Which is why queer theology makes so much sense, right? Which is why these sort of theological spheres where people are literally pushing the boundary. I understand Du Bois, even though some of the language is dated and all of that, but if people are willing to sort of forgive Marx or Hegel or Kant's language, which is very dated and stunted, I don't understand why they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to Du Bois, right? And so it's really kind of interesting, this relationship. I also think that some of the people that are uncomfortable, they don't understand that concept. When I talked about, Du Bois talked about the multifunctionality of the Black church. So here I am, youth minister of music in the church. But my mother, because we were so poor, she allowed me to play jazz. When I was 9 years old, I got my first $100 bill for playing a gig. So my mother, that was the devil, that was secular music, but because I could help my mom make rent. So again, like, but the church is the space where I got those skills, where I would work, do all these workshops. Every Saturday, you gotta go to choir rehearsal, blah, 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 blah. I mean, there's a level of musicianship. You gotta go and listen to songs and like, wow. And that's how some of these skills sort of grow up. And so it's not just a sacred space. And I don't think that people understand that. It also serves a lot of secular purposes as well. So thank you for the question. I'm sorry.
It's on Nathan next.
No, thank you so much. I would love to come back to that question of radical democracy that you started with. And I also would love to, when you showed that list of all the things that you contributed to and co-founded, I also want to add, as part of this radical democracy question, cooperative economics. Absolutely, was such a critical, which is the area I work in, absolutely a critical figure in the study and also organization, building organization, founded an association of cooperatives. And in that spirit, I wonder if, something lurking kind of in the backdrop of our conversations through this conference has been the moment, the rising authoritarianism around the world. I wonder if you could, I don't know, invoke something of his abolition democracy, the kind of radical democracy that he saw that was grounded not just in institutions but in everyday life, and speculate a bit about how he would think about democracy in a moment like today, where there's so much focus on defending often failed institutions, right, as the only way forward for democracy. How would he see a future for democracy in a moment like this, in the kind of global context that we're facing?
Okay, I'm gonna do my very best. I'm gonna try to keep this brief because I think that's a dissertation topic. Because you're obviously brilliant, and so I didn't want to shout you out. I go out of my way to try not to speak for Du Bois. I think he said so much, he did so much. As you know, he lived 95 years, right? He had an 80-year publishing career, and so for me, it's really important to say that I'm influenced by one of many. I would say Polly Murray is probably even just as big. And so I would say to you, in brief, democracy is alive. It's organic. I go back to the third chapter of The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. It begins, each generation must out of relative obscurity discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. What is our contribution to American democracy gonna be? Right? And as a hip hopper, can we remix it? See, for me, democracy is open to the remix. Democracy is open. This is the breakdown. If you understand what I'm saying, the deconstruction of it. What about the reconstruction? What can we contribute to? Me, I feel like there's so many people bringing so much ugly in the world. I'm trying to bring something beautiful in the world. I'm trying to share some poetry with you. I'm trying to share some songs with you, freedom songs. I'm trying to share some love with you. And I would say to you, for me, as a jazz musician, I think about democracy like I do the way that we play songs. Democracy is a tradition. If it's a tradition, in terms of the African-American aesthetic, it's got to be open to innovation. That's what keeps the tradition alive, or else it calcifies, or else it, right? When you talk in the realm of religion, if it's not open to each generation's new contributions, it becomes a cult. It becomes something that's right. You gotta, and I feel like some of that is creeping into not simply religious institutions, but larger, what should be public, open, society, democratic institutions. There's a kind of anti-democratic strain that is going on right now that's quite frightening, to be perfectly honest with you. And I think that for me, one of the ways I sort of massage my conscience is by speaking up and speaking out. Even though right now, when you start talking about Du Bois and cooperative economics, you know me as an African American, if I say that, they're going to call me a communist, the way they did Martin Luther King. See, after the I Have a Dream speech, that's when they started saying, he's the communist. Remember Stanley Levinson, his beautiful brother and friend, advisor, right? So they love to say, like, Du Bois, if you want to go read something, read a book by Gerald Horne called Black and Red. Right? Gerald Horne, my mentor at the University of Houston, when I did my postdoc down there for those 2 years, right? Du Bois said, wow, they're saying it's bad enough that we're Black, but now we're red too, red, right? So I think that there's a sense in which grappling with political economy in an incredibly, a hyper-capitalist society, a market-driven society like the United States of America, they have little buzzwords that they like to say. And they can sort of people actually believe this stuff. They try to discredit folks by using little buzzwords and everything. I appreciate the question, my brother.
Thank you. I have just a question. Not only what you said, but how you said it. I'm thinking about Fred Malcolm addressing the creative and intellectual gratefulness of the Black condition. We may call it dancing.
Hey.
And in that same token, and I'm thinking here in terms of the long tradition of the Black church, what you told us today, what Du Bois has written about for thousands of pages, who is following? And who is dancing? I mean, if you can talk about that, because it seems to me that it's not just people in the Black experience that I can follow, but there are many others who have been doing individual follow, but African Americans have been doing more of the dancing.
Social decay. Step further, decadence, right? Which is different than the kind of, we're all sort of lived in transitional periods. Probably most people in here were born in the 20th century. We transition into this new scene. There's something about those kinds of swing generations. Du Bois himself, right, born at the end of the 19th century, really put his imprint on the 20th century. And so I'm thinking about, we need to embrace our agency. They used to say, not Bill, kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall. We could also say queendoms rise, queendoms fall, right? We need to be audacious enough to ask questions about when institutions have served their purpose, their usefulness. An institution, to me, there's a kind of utility to the way we need to sort of look at things. And I know that some people are really entrenched, like because some of them have legacy, they have long, but when you think about an African American, one of the reasons we may, make falling look like dancing is because we've had no choice but to create whole brand new cultures, institutions, traditions, customs, so on and so. Why? Because Nabil, and I say this very gently, we're not continental African. We're certainly not American the way mainstream American society might view themselves as American. We're kind of betwixt and between. It's this whole double conscious kind of thing, which I don't think everybody suffers from. You can see me, I'm, Fernand, help me to rescue and reclaim, right, myself. And I do, as you know, the whole mental and psychological, emotional health. And also because I've been here for nearly 20 years and I've seen so many beautiful white brethren and sister and gender non-conforming folks, they've been struggling with some stuff, right? Really, really struggling with stuff, which, folks on the projects like me, like, wait, what? Really? That's a thing? Wow. Right? And so again, for me, this level of sort of revolutionary humanism that's at the heart of my work and just who I am, that sort of love ethic that extends well beyond just Black folk. I do see levels of decay, but I also see, I'm gonna say it slow, and I know you're gonna make fun of me, rebirth. See, that's that Afro-futuristic theme that wasn't just, can I ask you a rhetorical question? Did you go to the movie theater to see Black Panther, the first version of Black Panther? That didn't just resonate with African Americans, people all over the world. So what about sometimes Black religiosity leads to a kind of futurity? You might even say fantasy. You might even say utopian. You might say idealism. But what Dr. King did? There's some concrete things that came out of the civil rights movement. 1964, the Civil Rights Act. 1965, the Voting Rights Act. 1968, the Fair Housing Act. Just yesterday, I was contacted by the LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson Library down in Texas. They said, oh yeah, we want you to come down here and talk about LBJ and Martin Luther King. I said, well, I'll talk about Martin Luther King. I'll talk about Dr. King all day now, but I don't know if y'all really want me bringing to this man's library. I mean, done tore his little library up now. And again, I have respect for the Great Society legislation. I'm talking about those private phone conversations where he's calling King the N-word and referring to African Americans by the N-word. See, it's one face in public and another face in private, right? How do we reconcile that? And how do I watch this? Watch this? Here's the jazz musician. I'm improvising for you, brother. I just asked y'all to please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Du Bois is going around calling folks tribal. He uses words like heathen and so referring to Black people. Referring to Black people now, right? Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's see if we can, see, this is where I learned from Foucault when he talks about the archaeology. I want to, and what I did, you already know this, I sift through Du Bois's work to see what I can salvage from it for the 21st century. To look at this bridge between, I think we need to have some deeper critical archaeological studies of some of these. Du Bois helps me to think through some of the issues that he touched on that we're still grappling with today, like racism, like sexism, like colonialism, capitalism. But Du Bois wasn't grappling with heterosexism. I got to go to Audre Lorde for that. I've got to go to James Baldwin for that. I've got to go to E. Patrick Johnson, my brother, for that. You see? Right? This critical Black stuff. And then don't make me start talking about all the explosive work happening in trans studies. Black trans studies are blowing up. I mean, there's a whole nother world out there right now to where we can build on the foundation that Du Bois provides us. But then you and I both know religion is so personal. People quickly get in their feelings. And what I'm trying to say, if you could suspend that, like Herschel, right? This phenomenology, if we could bracket out some of those ugly feelings for a moment and really see, wow, there might be another way we can look at this. I might need to repair my relationship with in any institution I'm associated with. If you haven't noticed, I try to learn the long history of it. So when this school was founded in 1876, University of Colorado Boulder, my employer for the last 20 years, founded in 1876. The first African-American doesn't graduate from this institution until 1912. His name is Charles Dunbar Campbell. That's first African-American man. First African-American woman doesn't graduate from this institution until 1918. Her name is Lucille Berkeley Buchanan. Neither one of them could participate in the graduation exercises because they're African-American. But yet, when my center had the grand, everybody ran over there, didn't it? It was 700 people now. Everybody ran over there. Everybody ran over there. But that's not lost on me. And again, I'm not being negative. That's a historical fact. And I'm saying I wouldn't have created a center here if I didn't love it. It's a gift. It's not a negative thing. I'm trying to give something. So these people been out here since 1876. Come on now. I'm trying to give you a gift. So when I'm gone, and I will be one day, probably glad about it. I feel like Martin Luther, he said, I've been to the promised land and I've seen, right? I want to give a gift that will keep on giving. I hope my little lectures are like a John Coltrane jazz solo. Y'all take care.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Oh.
We're off for our panels, so remember that the wrap-up session, actually, the final will be here at 12:15, and there will be lunch, so pick up your lunch. And let's thank.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Isn't it incredible? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Did it by himself. They would not give him any research support. He did 5,000 interviews. He said he wore out 3 pairs of shoes.
Yeah.
Walking around.
Because I haven't seen it. I saw it yesterday, but or maybe I haven't. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll do it. I'll get back to you. Yeah, that's
Incredible.
I
think that some people don't realize, like, how Frederick Douglass said, oppression makes a wise man mad. I think that for me, this is what I see also in Tupac and some of the rappers. What if we're channeling some of that angst? You're saying what white youth did with punk rock, and again, I'm into music, so right, at least there's a creative outlet. So I actually, I like Sex Pistols, I like the Clash, I like the music. Like you got to be able to me output an outlet. If I can have jazz and gospel music, projects surrounded by those people, surrounded by crack cocaine explosion, radio outlets, all the negative things that people like to project on. But the first time I heard it, I read and I heard how cool this sort of jazz, gospel, this spiritual jazz was. And then I will tell you about all the rappers. There's a latent spirituality in their work. And again, like I said, being comfortable being here American, having respect for the motherland, but also understanding I'm in the diaspora, and there's this kind of cultural dynamic that's happening in the diaspora that's even influencing the continent. That's even, Nabil, you do know you couldn't get a ticket to see Black Panthers on the continent. But you think African Americans showed up for? So the fascinating things that, again, if I can be biblical for a moment, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. So the one, the stone that the builder refused will end up being the head cornerstone.
But like, that's a lot of colors.
Men.
Absolutely.
My dad raised a couple of chocolate about it with me, when I was getting all my surgeries and stuff, and he would wear it. I would wear it all the time, it's both sides, or that. I would like
There you go. There you go.
Without fail. And I inevitably accidentally wear those jeans.
It's going to be something.
Good experience so far?
Most of all, that's the community of our.
Well, you gonna come over to the car? Okay, okay, brother. I love you so much, man. Seriously. Thank you. My sister.
Right? Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
So many.